Hey, what's up, everyone? Professor Doe here. All right, so this is kind of the rest of the lecture for chapter 19. Just to give you guys a heads up, this is my fourth time attempting to record this. I'm having one heck of a time trying to get this lecture in. My computer's not working with me. I was 45 minutes into the lecture on my last recorder, and then my computer decides to restart all by itself without giving me a chance to save my work, and so I have to start all over again. So yeah, I'm kind of frustrated at the moment. So just letting you guys know, if I sound a little snappy, that's the reason why. It is 12:50. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I have to see you guys at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I really want to get this lecture done. And so yeah, I'm just really tired, and yeah, that's just whatever. Okay, anyway, so there you have it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get this lecture through. If you were kind of wondering, yeah, I don't look like I do in class at the moment. It is very late at night. I am frustrated. I don't know. I'm frustrated, and yeah. Also, I'm not quite wearing the typical clothing that I wear. And so the reason, one of the philosophies I have whenever I give an online, and also this is not even the program I use to give online lectures. I usually use another program that's much more clean than this program, but I have no choice because that was giving me problems, so it just wasn't installing right, and so adding to my frustration. Okay, so at least I found something to give you guys that lecture. Also, whenever I give online lectures, it's kind of my thought that if students can stay home, in bed, or wherever they want to be and watch the lecture, whatever, well, if that's the case, then the instructor can do the same too. So that's kind of why I'm, well, not really, but one good reason why it's okay for me to be in PJs while giving this lecture for you guys. All right, anyway, so without further ado, let's go ahead and continue on with chapter 19, communities and ecosystems. So I'm going to skip through all the slides that we've already gone through. Oh, by the way, do keep ponds clean or frogs get sick, something that might come in handy one day, something that you might want to think about for every day that you are in my class at the very least, especially the day, yeah, that's good enough to say. Okay, moving on. So we can get this going wherever we left off. Here we go. All right, species interacting communities. So species interactions have varying effects on the reproductive success of participants, and there's several different types of interactions that we're going to look at in the next few minutes. Hopefully Windows 10 won't restart on me while I'm giving a lecture. Don't think so. Hopefully not. Otherwise, I'm just done. I can't handle it anymore. Okay, moving on. You can see here, the first one here is known as competition. This is when both participants are being harmed in this interaction. Got mutualism, where both species benefit, and that kind of makes sense because it's a mutual relationship, right? A beneficial relationship. Oh, by the way, if during the lecture I start looking this way and not at the camera, the reason why is because I have my Snowball microphone, okay, that I'm using to record. Well, here we go. You can see. Well, there we go. So I'm using that to record this lecture, and so I think it's a camera. So my eyes will like to look at the microphone. Okay. So that will be, so we have mutualism where both species benefit. We have communalism where one species does benefit, but the other one doesn't care. Nothing happens to it. And then the fourth one is parasitism, herbivory, and predation, where one species benefits from the interaction, the other one is harmed in the process. So let's go ahead and talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. First one here is competition. Don't forget, in competition, both species are harmed in the process. So we have here an example of a particular type of food resource, and these vultures, or at least these species of vultures, are fighting for that particular resource that is in limited supply, especially in these particular regions of the world. And so both species are going to compete and fight it out, and in the process, both vultures might get harmed. They might get bloodied up and all that kind of stuff, and so they're both harmed in the process. Of course, the winner takes all. In most cases, the winner is going to take the resource, and the other one's going to have to just either sit there and cry about it, go find some other resources or whatever, okay? So that would be competition. Now, two species cannot coexist indefinitely in the same niche, so we have a principle known as a competitive exclusion principle, which states that the species that acquires more of that particular resource will eventually win, and the less successful species will eventually die out. So we have here an example of the Balanus versus the Thamellus, organisms. Excuse me. So you can see here on the left-hand side of the image, here's a closer image. On the left-hand side of the image, the Balanus, which are these big ones here, you can see the legend of the Balanus isn't present. So the Thamellus, okay, Thamellus here is able to kind of reproduce and take up a lot of the resources in this intertidal zone. Okay, no competition, they can just grow there with no problem. However, as soon as the Balanus starts coming into play here, they outcompete the Thamellus for resources, and of course the organism, the Thamellus will eventually be confined and restricted to the high tide zone because they can't outcompete the Balanus, okay, the faster growing Balanus. Excuse me. So that's that. Okay, now sometimes multiple species with similar requirements, they do coexist in the same habitat. So you can see in the image here we have species of warblers, these different kinds of birds, and what they're doing is that they are picking certain portions of the tree in order to get their resources. They have the same resources, okay? So this is competition for this is competition where you have resource partitioning instead of competitive exclusion where you're fighting for that exact same resource. So for example, this particular bird here is going to feed off the top of the tree. This second one here is going to feed off the top side of the tree. This third one here is in the middle of the tree, and these are around the tree, so on and so on. They kind of pick different portions, and so what happens? The warblers don't get hurt in the process. At least that's a typical. They don't get hurt unless they argue over other reasons, but most part they're not going to get hurt in the process. They each pick different portions of the tree to feed off of. It's kind of like a sharing is caring kind of do, but we're sharing the tree but not the you get it. Okay, so moving on. All right, we do have three others: mutualism, communalism, and parasitism. Now in mutualism, there is a mutualistic relationship between the two species, and they both benefit in this process. None of them are harmed in this relationship. So you can see in this image here we have two species. We have the species of ants, and the other species is the acacia tree, or the acacia plant. And in this example, the acacia plant is prone to having herbivores come over and eat its leaves. It doesn't want that. And so what the acacia tree has, it doesn't constantly think about this. It evolves to have these characteristics and is selected for, just keep that in mind. But a lot of biologists, not a lot of biologists, but a lot of people like to anthropomorphize, I think that's the term, anthropomorphize things that don't have consciousness or thought or whatever. So for example, the plant, I'm anthropomorphizing it. Okay. All right. So you can see here the acacia tree doesn't want to get eaten by herbivores, or it tries to prevent itself from getting eaten by herbivores, so it produces nectar, okay, which is a nutritious substance that these species of ants like to feed off of. And so these species of ants come by, they feed off of these nutritious nectar nodules, and then in return, while the ants are there, any kind of herbivore that comes on by and wants to eat that plant, the ants are going to use their little pincers and bite them out and chase them away. Okay, and so both the plant and the ant benefits from this, therefore increasing their reproductive success. Here's another one called commensalism, and that's when one species benefit but the other one isn't significantly affected. So you see in the top image you have a massive tree, and their tree trunk has moss that's growing all over it. Now, the reason why it's commensalism, because the tree is not harmed in this process. Nothing actually happens to the tree. If anything, the moss is growing on the bark of the tree, which is dead plant tissue. So the tree can live without that, pretty much can live without that bark. Okay? So it doesn't need the moss to survive. It just happens that the moss is tagging along for the ride. Nothing happens to the tree. So they are not significantly affected. So the moss benefits from having real estate resource to live off of. The tree, nothing happens to it. But we do have another type, which is known as parasitism, where one species benefits and the other one is harmed in the process. So you can see here on the right-hand side, we have a particular species of ringworm, which is pretty dangerous, and it happened to have gotten inside the people. When it gets inside, they travel to the lymphatic nodes, or at least they get into the lymphatic nodes, and then of the human body. And just to kind of remind you, the lymphatic nodes are part of the lymphatic system, which is the least talked about system. Most people, most classes, they teach about the cardiovascular system, the digestive system, all the main ones, respiratory system, but we hardly ever hear anything about the lymphatic system. And so lymphatic system is a whole other set of vessels where one of their big functions is to regulate the amount of lymphatic liquids that are cycling around your body, and also provides different regions, nodes in which your immune system can use to combat against foreign pathogens. Okay, so that's your lymphatic system. Also a way in which if you have excess water in your system, the water kind of obviously is going to go into your bloodstream, but can also leak into your lymphatic system, and is a way to kind of help any overflow and drain out. So that's one of the big ones for the lymphatic system. So these species of roundworms, they get into to a human system, and then they travel into the lymphatic system, and eventually what's going to happen is that these ringworms happen to get lodged in. They get caught in one of the vessels, and they get stuck in there. And once they get stuck, then the fluid, the lymphatic fluids that flow, they get blocked off until they build up on one end of the worm. Okay, they kind of just start building up, and that's why you see that these legs in the image, they're kind of really large, because there's an expansion of lymphatic liquids, and there's just like a water balloon. Okay, water balloon alone is just doesn't have very much, but as soon as you put water in it, and you put a lot of water, it starts to expand on out, right? Same thing here with these legs that you see in the image here, and this condition is known as elephantiasis. Okay, and that's caused by those ringworms. Very, very, very common in third world countries. The treatment in third world countries is very scarce, and so that's why a lot of people there, they have this, they kind of live with this condition. Okay, and you're probably thinking, oh, why don't you just remove the worm? Well, you can try, but trying to find that worm once you have a leg that's kind of that large, it's very difficult to do that, and especially in third world countries, like I said, where clinical sites are not as accessible as they are here in the United States. Okay, moving on. And if you can hear that, that's my heater. Okay. Now, feeding relationships can also link species. So we have predator and prey. The predators eat the prey. Okay, the predator organisms eat the prey organisms, and the prey organisms are being eaten by the predators. So that's, whenever you hear those two words, that's what they mean. The prey is the organism being eaten. The predator is the one doing the eating and the chasing and the biting and everything else to eat the prey. Okay. We also have here another term, herbivores. These are the organisms that consume plants. For example, rabbits are herbivores. Caterpillars are herbivores. Okay, species of butterfly and caterpillars are herbivores. These are the ones that feed specifically off of plants. Okay. All right. Now, what is it that the prey can do against such an onslaught of predators out there? Well, there are three different ones that we're going to discuss here in this slide. The first one here is known as camouflage. So what's going on is that the prey tries to blend in with its background so that the predator can't find it. The predator can't see it. So you can see here in our image, this particular insect here blends in very well with the plant that it's standing on. So the predators have a very difficult time seeing this insect and going after that food resource. Other types, warning color, you can tell it's really late. Warning colorations, which certain species use different hot colors like red, orange, yellow, or black. Those are really natural danger colors. Even if you see those colors in your mind, you're thinking, OMG, get away from those colors, right? When you're driving on the road, what color is the stop? Red. Okay, red means warning, danger ahead. If you don't stop, you could get hurt, right? So we use the exact same colors. So in this example, we have a species of frog that's using hot yellow to warn off other predators that, hey, if you eat me, something might happen to you. Whatever that thing that's going to happen to you, you might not like it. Okay, at least that's what the color is trying to convey. And for many species, it works very well. For this third one here, you have mimicry in order to defend itself against being eaten. And mimicry, which the prey tries to mimic its predator's predator. Does that make sense? So it mimics its predator's predator. We have one species of moth or other species of butterfly, and what they do is to prevent birds from eating it, small birds from eating it, they expand their wings out, and a lot of times their wings have massive defining characteristics that make them look like other predators. For example, there's a species of moth that when they open up their wings, they have these massive fat dots. I'm sorry, big dots in their wings, and they kind of mimic an owl. So when a bird flies by and says, hey, that looks like a moth, and all of a sudden the moth opens its wing and says, oh shoot, I better not eat that because that could be an owl. That's mimicry. The moth is copying the physical characteristics of an owl, at least the best it can, to kind of trick birds into thinking it's an owl. Okay, that's mimicry. It's copying. It's copying its predator's predator. Got it? Okay. Moving on. Now, sometimes adaptations of one species can select for adaptations in another species. So these two species kind of co-evolve in a process known as coevolution. So you can see here in this example on the right-hand side, we talked about this way back in chapter 1. This species of moth has a particular unique feeding tube that this species of plant over evolutionary time was naturally selected for, so that the moth and the plant go together. Okay, they interact together. Now, just to let you guys know, the moth did not pick a long feeding tube, didn't pull out of its back pocket a long feeding tube to feed off of this flower, and the flower didn't pick out a gene from its genome to make sure that its flower fits that of this moth. It just, over time, they were naturally selected for. Okay, over time. And it's to the point in this example where the flower and this moth are exclusive together. Okay. All right, you also have here keystone species, and they're central to maintaining diversity in a community. For example, we have these species of sea otter that do eat sea urchins in the sea. And without the sea otter, then the sea urchin's population goes unchecked. So they kind of proliferate and reproduce rapidly. There's no predator out there to eat them, so they're going to have huge population. And the larger the sea urchin population, the more resources they need to maintain that. So they're going to start kind of crawling around to different areas in that particular region and start feasting off of different species. And that could definitely disrupt the balance, the species balance, the species richness and species evenness, there's those terms, can disrupt those in that particular community. Okay, so those sea otters would be known as keystone species. Without them, the entire community gets thrown into whack. All right. So here is a thought question for your blue/green book. You thought you didn't have to do thought questions, right? Nope, guess again. So you might want to add these, and I will be checking for these. This will be a way for me to know that whether or not you watch this lecture. All right, so how many of the interactions in the following list are beneficial to one species but harmful to another? So pause this video. Go ahead and answer this question. If you have a friend watching the lecture with you, go ahead and communicate with them, interact, and try to come out with an answer. Pause the video and we'll come back. All right, so chances are you didn't pause this video and you just kind of went on playing it. So whatever, you should be pausing and trying out these problems, okay? But if not, well, whatever. Okay, moving on. So how many of these are beneficial but not harmful, but harmful to the other? We've got 3 of them. We've got herbivory, parasitism, and predation. Okay, all right, so hopefully you got those 3 right. Don't forget to add them to your blue book. Okay, so ecologists use 2 measures to describe a community's diversity and species composition. The first term is known as species richness, and the second term is known as species evenness. So we'll talk about species evenness on the next slide. So here's species richness. This is the total number of species occupying a particular kind of habitat. So as you can see here in this diagram that we have, let's compare the blue box and the yellow box. You can see here in the yellow box, right here in the yellow box, we have lower species richness. You can see in this one, if you look very carefully, there are only 3 species of trees. in that particular image, right over there, pointing at it right there, okay, right down there. So there's only 3 species represented. However, if you look at the blue image right over here, okay, if you look at the blue image, the blue box, there are 5 representative species in that same unit of area, 5 of them. So therefore you can say that there is more species richness in the blue box because you have more species represented there compared to the yellow box. Now it doesn't mean, it has nothing to do with how many of each species is in there. Well, you're just talking about species richness. You're counting how many different species are there. Okay, which is very different from counting how many individual organisms are in there. Okay, be very careful with that term, because if you're counting the number of organisms of that same species in that same area, that's a population. We're not looking at that. Okay, all right. So that will be species richness. The other term, species evenness, this describes a proportion of a community that each species describes a portion of community that each species occupies. So you can see here the community with high species evenness has equal numbers of each species. So let's take a look at our diagram here. You can see in the yellow box it appears that there is more species evenness compared to the lower box, because why? In the lower box you can see these triangular trees here. There's one here, and there's one of this species here. There may be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of this particular plant here at the bottom, where it's kind of short and oval shape, and then we have like 4 of these large ones there. So we have 1, 4, 9, 10, 20. These are definitely not stable, steady numbers. So therefore, that one has lower species evenness. But if you look here at the blue box, we've got 3 of the tall triangular trees, these cone trees here, pine trees. We've got 3 of this little pine tree here. We've got 3 of these round, big broccoli shaped trees there. Look, these pictures in the computer are very small, so it's hard for me to see. Compared to in lecture, I have a huge projector. Okay, so this has here very good, much more species evenness compared to that of the yellow box, because you have 3 species represented by each, three individuals representing each species, versus the bottom one you have like 1, 4, 9, 10, 20. Definitely low species evenness. Okay. All right, so here's another question for your blue/green book. Go ahead and check this out. Imagine the different shapes represent different species. Which community has low species richness and low species evenness? Go ahead and pause this video and attempt this question on your own. And I'll be back. Did you pause this video? I'm waiting. All right, fine, whatever. So you probably didn't pause this video, and you're probably laughing your tails off at home, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and get to the answer, because that's what everyone's looking for, right? Something to so that you can double check your answers. All right, you really want to double check your answers. Okay, hopefully you are. So what's the correct answer? It is B. That's the one that has lowest species evenness and lowest species richness. So how do you do this problem? Let's tackle it one at a time. How about lowest species evenness? Which one of those has it? Well, if you compare answer choices A, B, C, and D, it appears that answer choices C and D have higher species evenness compared to A and B, because C and D has the triangle, the square, and the circle. There are 3 species there, versus that in A and B you have 2 species. You have the triangle and the square, and the other one you have the circle and the square. So you can eliminate answer choices C and D. Now if you look, which one has the lowest species richness? Remember, I'm looking for a type of, in this problem, you should be looking for a type where it's like 1, 4, 9, 20, or some outrageously big difference. So only answer choice B gives that, because a circle species are only 2, but versus the square species, there are 10. But if you look at answer choice A, we have very good species evenness here. There are 5 triangles versus 5 squares, very steady species evenness. So therefore, answer choice B has both low species richness and low species evenness. So hopefully you got that question right. Hopefully you even attempted this problem, and hopefully you'll write this in your blue book, right? Okay, moving on. Now, ecologists measure species evenness and species richness over time to determine if a community has changed. Okay, that's something very important, especially when ecologists are trying to determine the health of a particular area. That would be very useful information indeed. All right, so succession is a gradual change in a community's species composition. So how do communities change? We'll find out. First terminology word here is primary succession. This occurs in an area where no community previously existed. For example, after a volcanic eruption, a volcanic eruption decimates whatever land was there or whatever was there originally. So that wasn't the original community. That wasn't the original ecosystem. So consider when a volcanic eruption happened, it's a brand new ecosystem in there. Okay, so the events of primary succession are very predictable. So as each species colonizes this, free area, open area, they start to change the chemistry of that land. So you can see here, we have here originally bare rock, and then as time moves on, you have the first species that colonize that area. In this example, they're known as the lichens. Okay, so those species, the first species to colonize a brand new area, those are known as pioneer species. Okay. And then after you get the lichens, what comes next? If you guessed werewolves and vampires, you are wrong. Okay, well, not in this world. Okay. The next one here in this example will be known as mosses. You get the reference, right? Okay, we have here the mosses. And then these two species kind of thrive and they reproduce. Eventually they die, obviously. All organisms die. Eventually they will die. And then other organisms will come by and say, hey, look, decomposing flesh, nutrient resources of dead carcasses of whatever species is there. Let's take advantage of them. So you get the decomposing pioneer species. And they start to feast upon those carcasses. And as they do so, they also excrete out waste. They also can do other things that changes the soil chemistry. And so as time moves on, the soil chemistry becomes nutritious enough where the first plants start to establish themselves here. So we get the herbs and the weeds. And then next, the soil, as more organisms starts to colonize the area, then the soil becomes much more dynamic, much more rich in nutrients, and so therefore larger trees and shrubs and plants can grow in that particular area. So something to think about. Now, secondary succession occurs when a community is disturbed but is not destroyed. So species find new niches in a particularly cleared ecosystem. So you can see in this image, there was a massive, I think that looks like a massive forest fire. Definitely decimated a heck of a lot, decimated a majority of the land there. But it doesn't mean that it was destroyed. Organisms will start to move in. They see the clearing of the area and they start to say, hey, this might be a place that they want to live in. So that will be secondary succession. Organisms move in after a huge natural disaster has happened to the area. Now, this is different than a volcanic eruption. Volcanic eruption decimates everything in there, okay? But in this case, it was a forest fire. You still get some things that are living there. Now, thanks to frequent disturbances, few communities reach climax conditions in which diversity and composition are stable. What is the number one species that does this, that definitely disturbs the climax conditions of different ecosystems? If you guess the human species, you're absolutely right. We have colonized a heck of a lot of the land in many different ecosystems. We live here on the coast. We've got the desert ecosystems humans live in. Even in cold Arctic areas, we do have some small population of people. Those will be known as researchers, right? But some populations are living there. They're everywhere. Okay, so we are the ones causing this, and that actually contributes to a possibly a mass extinction that we are causing upon ourselves. Okay, moving on. This is kind of where my computer restarted. I think this is it. Okay, it hasn't restarted yet, which is good. All right, here we go. Ecosystems require constant energy input. You and I, in order to keep ourselves going throughout the day, we need to eat and attain food, nutrients in order to create the energy that we need to move through the day. So let's take a look at this. An organism's trophic level describes its position in the food chain. So energy is lost at each level of the food chain. On average, only about 10% of the energy at a trophic level is available to the next level. So you can see here the producers are like the plants. They produce yay amount of energy, but as they get consumed and eaten by, say, these primary consumers, only 10% of the energy, roughly around 10%, gets passed on down to the next level. So we have here in our diagram the producers and the primary consumers, like the herbivores. They eat the plants. In this example, it's a tomato plant, and then they gather that energy. And the secondary consumers eat this species of beetles, and they gather their energy. And then the tertiary consumers eat up the secondary consumers. And as they die, then you have the decomposers take advantage of their carcasses and whatever nutrients they leave behind. Now, just like we learned in the energy chapter, as energy moves from one system to the next, heat is lost in the process. Now, I get a lot of this question in my Bio 1 class. Oh, by the way, let's see here. Yeah. Primary production is the energy trapped by producers. If not for this energy, consumers would die. So I get a lot of students asking me this question, like, if plants produce this amount of energy, okay, why is it that as we move up the trophic levels, organisms become much more complex, at least in their view? Why is it that, plants are very stationary, they stay in one spot, they don't look like they do very much, but as you move on up the trophic levels, they start to move, they growl, they look at you, they feed off of you, they run, they bite, they do all this kind of stuff. Why is it becomes more complex? And also, I had a couple students do research, and they find out that the needs of organisms up higher in the food chain, the energy needs are much higher compared to that of plants. So what is going on there? Well, one of the main reasons why. They're technically right in terms that the producers produces yay amount of energy, and only 10% moves on to the next trophic level. But just keep this in mind. In order for these organisms to supply that energy, they have to eat more of it. So this species of beetle is going to have to eat a lot of these producers in order to supply the high energy demand that it needs. Does that okay? So hopefully that kind of makes sense to you guys. So if that particular plant produces this amount of energy, they're not going to eat that one plant and gain all those resources. They have to eat multiple plants in order to reach their energy needs. Okay. All right. Okay, so again, if it's not for the energy produced by these plants, these producers, life on the planet would be very scarce, if not non-existent. So this was kind of, if you guys have ever watched The Matrix with shoot, I forgot the actor's name that played Neo, not coming to my head right now. Anyway, if you remember in The Matrix, when Morpheus was with Neo and he described what happened in their early Earth history, he said that the machines started becoming way too smart, and then they started kind of taking over human populations. So what they did in the movie, they said that they created these dark clouds and they spread them throughout the sky to block out the sun, so that the machines who were dependent on the sunlight for their energy needs could no longer get their energy. Okay. And so technically that's true, and that's kind of the theory that was kind of brought about with what happened 65 million years ago with the dinosaurs. As when the comet landed in roughly around the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of debris and ash kind of flew up into the air, and then it blocked out a huge portion of the sunlight, therefore leading to a huge mass extinction in that area. Okay, in that era, that's what I mean, that era. Now, of course, obviously in The Matrix, it's kind of, sci-fi, and so they're kind of saying, okay, well, what the machines did, they started eating, they started growing humans and eating them for their energy needs. Okay, that's kind of where the sci-fi kind of comes in there. But that the concept is there. They block out the sun so that the primary producers that attain the energy from the sun can no longer provide that. And the machines in the movie can't use solar energy for that also. Okay? So hopefully that kind of gives you something relatable. Now, chemicals that are fat soluble and do not readily degrade ascend, they go up the food chain. So that's known as biomagnification. Okay, they become more concentrated at higher trophic levels. Now, if a biomagnifying chemical is harmful to a top predator, the species composition through the community might change. So you can see in this diagram we have here the chemical known as DDT, very harmful for species of birds, especially in their egg laying. So you can see that's kind of found here in these producers, and as we move on up the food chain, they start to become much more concentrated. Remember I told you in the last example they have to eat a lot more of that particular organism in order to meet their energy needs. Well, as they're eating more, they start to gather a lot of those DDT molecules, and they start to kind of become very thick, very concentrated. And then once we get to the top here, okay, when they lay eggs, it affects the shells of the eggs. It becomes much more brittle and weak, to the point where when they lay their egg, when the mothers sit down on the egg, they go, they smash, okay, and so therefore it becomes very detrimental to their population growth. So that's one of the reasons why the government has banned much of DDT from industrial manufacturing uses, because of one of the main reasons, because of this. Here's another thought question for your blue/green book. So go ahead and answer this in there. Suppose you're at a lake and you see a sign warning of mercury contamination in fish. It says that bluegill sunfish are generally safe to eat, but the consumption of flathead catfish should be limited to two or fewer meals per month. This advice implies that flathead fish are what? Higher or lower on the food chain than bluegill fish? So go ahead and pause this video and answer that question. I'll wait. Okay, waiting's done. Okay, so is it higher or lower? Well, the correct answer here is higher. Did you pause the video? I don't think so. Hopefully you did. If you did, you better tell me about it in lecture. All right, so it is higher because it is because the flathead fish has so much more toxin. That's why they kind of limit the human consumption for that. Versus that the bluegill fish, they don't care. Even though it has that they might have that toxin in there, mercury contamination, but it's not so concentrated to the point where it's going to make massive effect based on this hypothetical problem. All right, hopefully you got that right. All right, so we're on to the final segment of the lecture. This is actually where I stopped. I remember I stopped here, and hopefully the computer won't restart. So all organisms interact with the non-living environment. So biogeochemical cycles trace some of these ecosystem level processes. Water, carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus are 4 elements really, really important in life. So let's go ahead and take a look at how each of these chemicals interact with their ecosystems. You can see here the atmosphere interacts with the water. Water interacts with the soil and rocks. Rocks and soil interacts with organisms. Organisms interact with the atmosphere, and they all interact with each other. So that's kind of what this diagram is saying. All right, let's talk about water. You remember this image way back in an earlier chapter. Now, the producers and consumers take in water from lakes, rivers, or the ground. So you can see here in this diagram, we drink the water. Producers, drink their water. Producers like plants, they also attain water for themselves too. And then the water vapor can evapotranspirate, or it transpires through the pores in leaves. Excuse me. And then they go and evaporate up into the sky. Evaporate is when the water becomes like a gas, and then it goes up. It flies up into the sky. Cellular respiration can also produce water, which some of which is lost as water vapor. When you and I breathe out, we do lose some water vapor. Okay. Now, water vapor also accumulates in the atmosphere through evaporation from lakes, oceans, rivers. Oh, also, we do expel out water too in our urine. Yes, urine has water. Actually, around 80% water is in there. 20% are ammonium nitrogenous wastes that go in there. One of the reasons why we drink so much water is because that nitrogenous waste in high concentrations is harmful to us. So our body uses the water that you drink every day to dilute all the nitrogenous waste that your body produces, so it's not harmful for you. Okay, that's one of the reasons why they say when you urinate, okay, when you urinate or void, V-O-I-D, voiding is another word for urination. Did you know that? Okay, so when you avoid something, no, I'm kidding. So anyway, that's void. Void means you're urinating. That's a medical term for urination. Sometimes I wonder, why can't they just say they urinate or something? They have more than one term for the same thing. That's one of the things I complain about in medical terminology. Why they have 5 different terms? Like, for example, defecate is when someone releases out solid waste. Okay, defecate, eliminate, and then pooping, all that kind of stuff. There's so many different words out there for the same thing. I just wish they could just stick with one word. Okay, we also excrete out through our urine, through sweat. We can excrete out water. Okay, and as soon as the water evaporates up, they go up in a particular layer in the atmosphere, and then as more water vapor goes up there, that particular air starts to become more thick, become more concentrated in water. And if it gets concentrated and thick enough, then the water droplets start to do a little cohesion, okay, and they start to come together. And when they get heavy enough, they drop. And when they drop, they precipitate, or that's another word for rain. Okay, so it starts to rain, and it returns back onto the land. All right. Here's another. Carbon is also part of all organic macromolecules. Here is an image of a very familiar compound that you should know. Do you know it? Well, we'll find out. Try to take a guess at what this is. You should know. I won't talk about it because you should know. Okay, anyway, let's kind of move on here. So carbon dioxide is the main inorganic storage reservoir for carbon. So if we're trying to, if organisms are trying to attain the carbon atom for themselves, the main place that they're going to go to are these two places, these two inorganic storage reservoirs. In the air, we breathe in carbon dioxide, and if you go back to the glycolysis chapter, you'll notice that the carbon dioxide is used as part of a building block to make glucose. Okay, and so that's one right over there. Okay, that's one. I'm sorry, plants, not us, plants. They use that. That plants use that. Misspoke. It's really late. Plants use it to build their glucose molecules by breathing in the carbon dioxide. It's one of the reasons why back in olden days, I wasn't alive back then, okay? Back in way olden days, our parents' generation, they say that, if you sing to a plant, the plant will perk up. Well, when you sing, everyone assumes that you have to sing well. You don't have to sing well. You can just talk to a plant. You can just breathe down its throat. And it will perk up regardless, whatever you do. Just do that to a plant and it will be happy for it, okay? You don't necessarily have to sing to a plant, but if you want to sing. I can sing to a plant if I wanted to, but anyway, just something to think about. We also have carbon dioxide that's dissolved in the ocean also, okay? Whoops, sorry, wrong way. Dissolved in the ocean as well. Okay, so these are two main inorganic reservoirs. Now, through photosynthesis, as I mentioned, I did a little misspoke there. Through photosynthesis, producers produce carbon dioxide to make organic molecules like glucose. Now, the producers use some of these organic molecules for their own respiration. Remember that question that I asked you guys in lecture? Plants only do photosynthesis and animals only do cell respiration. Well, that is a very inaccurate statement. Plants do photosynthesis and respiration. This is kind of an example there. In photosynthesis, they produce the glucose molecules from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and then that glucose moves on to their own mitochondria where they process that on down. Okay, they process that down to make energy for themselves. And in the process of breaking down that glucose molecule that you and I, animals, you and I, and even plants can do, carbon dioxide is released back out into the atmosphere. Okay? Herbivores and predators, they can take advantage of the plant's glucose storage and use it for themselves. And then their respiration, once they consume down the glucose, they also release out carbon dioxide. You and I, we will release out carbon dioxide, but we can't make glucose molecules. Otherwise, we'd appear green, like that character in the recent Star Trek movie that was directed by James Abrams. J.J. Abrams, whatever. Now, decomposers use organic molecules in the soil and release carbon dioxide through respiration. Okay, decomposers are living organisms as well. They're made up of cells, so clearly they're also going to release out carbon dioxide too. Okay, so they can contribute to that carbon dioxide reservoir. Carbon also cycles in aquatic food webs. The ocean is a major reservoir for carbon, So you can see here the carbon is dissolved in, and different aquatic plants can take advantage of that. All right. We also have here nitrogen, and that's an essential component of proteins and nucleic acids. What is this an image of here? And what groups are these? You might want to ask yourself, what is this general image here? What is this a general molecule of? Okay, so you should know that. Now, the atmospheric nitrogen, N2, that's nitrogen molecules, okay, is the main inorganic storage reservoir for nitrogen. So it's in the air. Majority of our air is nitrogen gas. It's around 20% is actually oxygen, and the rest is some other stuff too. Okay, so just know that that's one of the reasons why when we breathe in, our lungs have to kind of pull out oxygen in order to supply our bodies with that molecule. But the majority of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Okay. Now, we do have nitrogen fixing microbes that can convert this nitrogen gas into ammonia. And now that you can see ammonia here is NH4. And if you notice that NH4, it looks very similar to what you saw on that last molecule. So I want to think about that, okay? Now, this is a nitrogen source some producers can absorb. Now, nitrifying bacteria then convert this into a nitrate, NO3 nitrate, which is another form of nitrogen that producers can use. And then the producers absorb this, these two compounds from the soil. So the producers will definitely use that. Like plants will use it. Herbivores and predators, they can attain this nitrogen source by consuming and eating those herbivores that took those in, or those plants that took them in. And then denitrifying bacteria then converts the NH4 and NO3 back into nitrogen gas and then releases it back out into the atmosphere. So that's kind of the cycle and how it goes. Phosphorus is another one that occurs in nucleic acids like in ATP. Remember, the P in ATP stands for phosphorus, right? And remember in the lipids section where you saw an image of phospholipids, well, that letter P, that's a phosphorus group. Okay, PO4 technically is a phosphate group that has a phosphorus atom. Now, phosphate-rich rocks are the main inorganic storage reservoirs for phosphorus, which enters soils as the rocks kind of break down and erode. Okay, so you can see in this image we have phosphorus rocks and ocean sediments. They kind of dissolve and break down into the ocean where other organisms can pick that phosphorus up and use it for themselves. Producers, like I said, absorb this phosphorus from the soil, often with the help of mycorrhizal fungi. Okay, it's different species of fungi. Herbivores and carnivores then obtain this phosphorus by eating those that attain it through the natural environment. And the decomposers, once these organisms die, decomposers will obviously consume their tissues or whatever, and then they release those compounds back into the soil for use by others. So all in all these chemical cycles are similar all through these major atoms, carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. They cycle between the abiotic reservoirs like the soil and the atmosphere, and then the biotic reservoirs, which is between different organisms. At different, like autotrophs, consumers, and decomposers. Autotrophs are like plants. They're the ones that produce their own food. Okay? So that's that diagram there. Here is another thought question for your blue book. If you thought we were already done, well, we've got more. Assume that phosphorus fertilizers become much more popular. How many of the following reservoirs would increase in phosphorus storage? So I'm going to pause the video, and you should enter this and write this down in your blue book. I didn't pause. You're supposed to pause. Did you pause? All right. Okay, now we're back. Because we got to be back. So which one of these? 4 of these: the soils, the producers, the fresh water, and the ocean, is where the phosphorus will get released out into. I wouldn't worry about that. Okay, so that kind of concludes the lecture. I'm very happy that I didn't have any problems. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. So yeah, it is 1:45 in the morning right now, and I am tired. So I'm gonna sign on out. Hopefully you enjoyed this lecture. Obviously, it's gonna be available to you until the end of the semester, so you can use this, replay it, whatever you need to do to catch up on the material. This is what I would have talked about in lecture anyway. This is what I'm going to would talk about in lecture anyway. Okay. All right. Anyway, until then, I'll see you in the morning. If you're watching this now, I highly doubt it, but I'll see you guys later. Okay, and good, best of luck. All right, see you in class, guys.